YouTube, welcome back to my channel. Today we're here for a very quick July recap. In July, my goal was to read 30 books in 30 days. I don't think I told you that here on YouTube. I might have mentioned it on Instagram. If you're following me over there, you'd probably have seen that, but we didn't get anywhere with that goal. We read 15 books, which was amazing, and I read like all the time. So I don't know what reading 30 books would look like now that the little one is here, but we're going to see if we can pull it off one of these months. But in July, we read 15 books, so we're just here to talk about them briefly. I don't know how much time this little one is going to give me, so we're going to make the best use of every moment. So, like I said, July was a fantastic month for reading. I participated in 2 readathons. I participated in a read-along, and I had a few buddy reads, and so it was amazing. The term, in terms of group reading and group reading experiences, that was fantastic. So the books, we're back after a short break in transmission because Daddy came home and took the baby. So now we're going to talk about the books at rapid pace so that I can wrap up this video and edit it and do everything that I need to do before he needs to go do something else. So books that I read in July. First book that I finished in July was Saville by David Storey. This is a 1976 Booker Prize winner, and I buddy read this with Karen from KD Books. And this one is about a young boy who is growing up in Scotland, I think. Can't remember, but it's about his life in a working class neighborhood. His father works in a colliery, and the family has sons, and they want these sons to be educated. They want them to move up in society. But we see the evidence through this boy's life about how difficult it is coming from a working class neighborhood and having working class habits and being surrounded by people who are of more affluent means, how difficult it is sometimes to fit in when his friends from school come to visit him and his habits are very different from theirs, and how he resents some of the habits of his family and his neighbors. And this was really interesting. High recommendations for this, even though it is a long book and the author does tend to go into some places that I didn't know if they necessarily meant to keep the story in line or if it was a little distracting. But I enjoyed this. I gave it a high 4-star rating, and I'm going to be talking more about this in a single book review for my Booker Prize winning series later. The next book that I finished was Destination Wedding by Diksha Basu, and I read an e-arc from Penguin Random House. And this is the author of The Windfall, which I read and enjoyed a couple of years ago. Diksha Basu is Indian, so she's an own voice writer, writing about Indian life, Indian living, from the perspective of people who have lived outside of India and are returning home. And in Destination Wedding, we're reading about a family. The family's a little separated. Mother and father are divorced. Mother has a new boyfriend. Daughter is an adult, and everyone now is going back to India for a wedding. And they also bring the mother's boyfriend and the daughter's friend with them. And so we're seeing how we're seeing this Indian experience through the eyes of immigrants, but also through the eyes of people who have not lived in India and are having this other kind of culture shock reaction to some of the things that they're seeing there. And that is being mixed with the experiences and perspective of people who are Indians living in India. So it was really interesting just to see how all these people from these different backgrounds interact with each other. It was hilarious. Destination Wedding can be compared to Kevin Kwan's Crazy Rich Asians, but with an Indian flavor, and I loved it. It was funny, it was interesting, it was really great parody of Indian living, but again, because its own voices, it's just hilariously appropriate. So Destination Wedding, I gave that a 4-star rating. Other books that I got from the publishers in order to review, I got Let Them Be Kids by Jessica Smartt. The subtitle of this one is Adventure, Boredom, Innocence, and Other Gifts That Children Need. I got this one from Thomas Nelson Publishers. They're a Christian-based publisher, and I review books for them. This one is a memoir / parenting self-help book. That is Jessica Smartt right there, and she's a Christian mother, and she talks about some of the things that you need to give your children just to allow them to experience their childhood. And so right there in the title, she's talking about giving them the gift of adventure and boredom in order for them to learn how to create things. And This was fantastic. I thought that this was a really great resource for me as a new mother, learning how to be a parent and learning how not to indulge every whim and fancy of your child. And I thought this was a really great resource. I gave this a high rating. I also read All Things Reconsidered by Knox, McCoy, and this was also from Thomas Nelson Publishers. And Knox McCoy is another Christian. He's a podcaster who says that he's an introvert. And in this one, he's talking about some of the ideas, big picture, big ideas, big concepts that you might think that you're settled on, but inviting you to reconsider your position on some of these things. And I thought that this was also really interesting. Some of the questions that he asks are: participation trophies really the scourge of our times? Is it really worth it to be a ride or die sports fan? Where is home and what does it mean to leave it behind? Do we believe in God because of the promise of heaven or the threat of hell? Things like that. This was a really interesting read. I thought that it was really well done. Both of these are really great resources, and I'd highly recommend these if you're looking for books that have clean writing, but not necessarily talk too much about Bible. Thomas Nelson books, I think, are a really great place to start. Then I did a buddy read of Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and unfortunately this book had an encounter with a baby, which is why it is ripped. Wuthering Heights is a classic, so you probably know the story. This is about Heathcliff, who is brought into a family, and the other children in the family resent him, so he grows up feeling like an outsider, and as an adult he has to figure out how he feels about these people now that he's older and has choices. Does he want to take revenge on them, or can he overlook their childhood, their shared childhood? And I buddy read this one in preparation for reading Maurice Conde's retelling of this book, which is called Windward Heights and set in the Caribbean. And the plan was to get to both of them in July, but now we've moved Windward Heights over to August just because the other buddy readers weren't able to start the book right away. But I read and really enjoyed this one, and I've already started Windward Heights, which is the retelling, and I'm loving it. I also read Staying On by Paul Scott, which is another Booker Prize winner, and this was another buddy read with Karen from KD Books, and Karen is all Booker Prize books right now. He started a Booker Boy book club, which is intent on reading all the Booker long listed books for 2020. I am not in that. I just don't have time to read all those books right now. But I wish Kieran well, and I'm going to link his channel down below. If you are interested in reading and discussing the books that have been longlisted for the Booker Prize, go check him out. And yeah, so we read Staying On by Paul Scott, which is set in India, and it is about the fall of the British Empire in India. It talks about Indian independence from British rule and what it meant for the people who were from England, who were living and working in India at the time of independence and decided to stay on, hence the title. And we're reading about the death of one of these characters, and it's really, you know, an allegory for the end of the British rule. And so we're seeing how the imperial system was viewed by Indians who had been living there, whether they were receptive or resentful. I liked it a lot more than Karen did, so I'll be talking more about that in a review coming up on my channel very soon as well. Other books. I read Chintu by Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi, and this was the Read So Lit summer read along. This is a book about Uganda. Uganda is the main character in this book, even though we're reading about Ugandan history through the generations in a family. We start following these characters in the 1700s, and we read about the generations as a curse is manifested through the generations. And this was so interesting. The author chose to write about Africa and Uganda almost entirely without Europe and European influences being mentioned. And so this was a fantastic read, and I highly recommend, if you haven't read this book before, to pick up this book and then go watch the discussion video on Didi's channel. Didi from Brown Girl Reading hosted a discussion, and the author paid a surprise visit, and she was there for the discussion. And this is one of the best books that I've read all year. This was one of my first 5-star reads for July, and yeah, loved it. But thankfully it wasn't my only 5-star read, because I also read The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett, and this was also a 5-star read for me. Brit Bennett is an African American woman, and in this story she's writing about colorism in the United States. And in this one she tackles the subject of white passing, how people who are fair complexioned black people sometimes decide to try to see if they could pass as white, because there is so much of a difference between how people who are white and people who are black are perceived. So a person who is black but white passing will have a very different experience as someone who is as the same person who's black but perceived as black. And so in this story she talks about the difference that twins experience based on whether they are taken as black or white. Fantastic read, 5-star rating, and I recommend that you pick that one up if you haven't already. Then I read, and all of these I was reading during the reading rush, so I read this during the reading rush, and this during the reading rush, and this during the reading rush. I picked up The Forest Unseen, A Year's Watch in Nature by David George Haskell. This was a recommendation from Doris from all the books, and this was fantastic. This is a biologist who lives and works in Tennessee, and this is his diary of visiting a plot of land in the Tennessee forest, and visiting every few days for a year, and writing about what he sees, and not just what he sees but also what he sees evidence of. So he's not just writing like I would go to the forest and write, oh, I saw a blue jay or whatever. He's writing but also giving us the biology behind the things that are present. And so he talks about the big animals, the macroscopic life, but he's also talking about the microscopic life and the microbes and the presence of microbes. He would talk about how an insect landed on him and what the insect is looking for from him, because he says insects need salt in their diet, but salt is not present in a lot of the forest experience. And so when humans come in and they sweat, these insects land on your skin to try to suck the salt. And fascinating. This is a book that I will reread at some point, because I'm not going to remember everything that this author covered, and it was just so fascinating, so interesting, such a really great biology lesson, and I loved it. That's another 5-star read for me. So all those 3 books that I read during Reading Rush were 5-star. I also read Say It Louder by Tiffany D. Cross, and Tiffany D. Cross is a news analyst. She's worked on CNN and BET, and this is her description of racism and racial discrimination as experienced in the media. So she talks about how sometimes people of African descent experience racism just from being in a room where they're the only person of African descent there, but also in a broader, more trickle-down effect. If there are no people of African descent in decision-making positions in the media, that will also determine what is being broadcast in the news and how it's being discussed. And so this was really interesting. She's a very intelligent writer, but it's also written in scholarly but sisterly discourse. So very interesting to read. Some of it is a little tough, but her writing makes it palatable to read, that's for sure. Then I read The Confessions of Franny Langton by Sara Collins. And Sara Collins is of Jamaican and Caymanian descent. And this is set in the slave period, and we're reading about a young woman who is of mixed background. She's a light-skinned black woman, so you know that she has a white ancestor, but because of her black ancestors, she's been living as a slave, and her slave owner takes her to England, where he gives her to another owner, essentially. And eventually there's a crime and she is accused of having committed that crime. So this is her confessions. This is her writing about what she's been accused of, but also what she is confessing to. Very interesting, very, very interesting book. Yeah. Then I read Bright by Duanwad Pimwana, and Duanwad Pimwana is a Thai writer. I think she is one of the first, or is she the first Thailand female author to be translated to English. I want to tell you the name of the translator. Her name is Mui Pupoksakul. Bright was a fantastic read. It's about a 5-year-old boy who's been abandoned by his family when they split up, and he has to now live at the mercy of his neighbors who are living in a tenement in Thailand. And so these are people who have desperate means, and yet they try to provide for him. But this 5-year-old boy quickly learns that he has to become responsible for himself, and so he learns how to get a job and how to save for his expenses and how to budget. And meanwhile, he's also having the adventures of a child who's not living under constant adult supervision. This was a fantastic read. The ending is a little ambiguous, but I think it's meant to show this bigger picture of Thailand and poverty and politics. And I recommend everyone to pick up this book. This was a 5-star read for me. So if you're looking for a book for Women in Translation month in August, definitely pick up Bright by Duanwad Pimwana. And I read Love and Math by Edward Frankel, and the subtitle of this one is The Heart of Hidden Reality. Edward Frankel was a Jew growing up in Russia at a time when there was a lot of discrimination still being levied on Jews in the 1980s, I think. And so here he talks about how difficult it was to get higher education as a Jewish man, because a lot of opportunities were still being denied. So there's a lot of his memoir included. So even though this starts off talking about math, we jump quickly into some of the discrimination that he suffered. And so this book, I think, suffers a little bit from the author trying to marry the two things, and it's not always done seamlessly. But the math in here is so interesting. Like, he talks about some origins of things that as an engineer I don't remember ever having heard before. So fascinating book. Then I read The Sirens of Mars, Searching for Life on Another World. This was another e-arc that I got from Penguin Random House Publishers, and the author of this one is Sara Stewart John. She's writing about her experience working towards a space mission and working in Australia in the desert, because this is the place on Earth that is most like the environment on Mars. And so incorporated in her story, she's talking about space exploration from her own experience, from history, and it's fascinating. And I didn't get everything, and I'm going to be rereading this in print because I'm finding that I'm not loving some of these books, especially nonfiction books. I'd rather not read them on my phone, on my Kindle app. That's just it. So read this one in order to write a review, but I'm going to be rereading this in print at some point, hopefully soon. And then the last book that I read in July was Well Read Black Girl, a collection of essays by Black women writers, edited by Glory Edim. And this was another 5-star rating for me because it was fantastic. I laughed, I cried. I also saw myself within the pages, because here we have writers who are talking about how important it is for people, not just Black girls, but people in general, to see themselves being represented in literature, in fiction, in memoirs, in poetry, in art in general, how important it is. And some of these writers talked about how they didn't really see themselves in literature until they started writing their own stories. So this was a fantastic reading month. I also didn't mention I participated in the summer school readathon from Doris, and so I just wanted to point out the books that I read in order to participate in the summer school readathon. These were my math books, Common Core, fiction and nonfiction. This was my book for ELA, my classic book. And for social studies, I should say that I read a book that was set in Africa, even though this was not the social studies book that I had started looking for, and exploration because I'm interested in nature and science, so we could say that this was science as well. And yeah, other books that I wanted to read for exploration, I think this was on my exploratories because I wanted to read about parenting. And yeah, it was a fantastic reading month. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video, subscribe if you want to see more. I'll be back next time with another video, hopefully with the baby, and not a cranky baby either. But for now, let's chat in the comments. I'd love to hear how your reading month went in July and what you have going for August. So thanks for watching this video. Let's talk down there. Until next time, happy reading. Bye.